Hello everybody, Richard Michael Owen here, and today we're doing a follow-up video on the early XK120 motor I disassembled over a year ago. If you haven't seen that video, I highly encourage you to go back and have a look at how this thing was disassembled and the problems that arose. Now this engine comes from a very early XK120 coupe. It has the studless cam covers. It's a very early style of engine, and it came from a car out of a barn not far from our shop. So we took this car out of the barn with full anticipation of a restoration, and that's where this engine's going to end up. And by the end of this episode, we're going to get it back in the chassis. How about that? So yeah, this is going to be a long one, but if you're into early XKs, come along for the ride. Let's do this. All right, let's start with this bare block and build up a complete engine. Now, since we've seen this block last, a lot of work's been done to it. We have a lot of shiny new metal here. See the top of the block here has been machined just to make it true. A little bit of material taken off so it mates up nicely to the cylinder head. And the bores have been punched out 20th hour for new pistons. Yeah, looking really nice. And with the rear here, I'm gonna make an upgrade. I'm trying to keep this engine pretty original, but I am gonna upgrade the rear seal because there was no seal originally. It was just a tight fit to the end of the crankshaft, which has a thread on it. I'll show you what that looks like. And we're gonna upgrade it to a more positive rope seal. So we have this carrier here, and it accepts the rope seal. This is actually went all the way up to the 4.2 designs, and I think this carrier is off of 4.2. You can see it has the groove in there for the rope seal, where it's just plain and flat on the original. And the machining doesn't end there. There was a bit of work here done to the bottom end. So you can see the main caps have been resized. What that means is a bit of material's been taken off the surface here that mates to the block, and then it's been accurately line honed. So the bearing surfaces are a perfect circle. Okay, I'm gonna put on the top carrier, right like this. It's held on with some dowels. I'm gonna put some of everybody's favorite sealant on here, some silicone, just a bit if I can. That's lovely. And that'll go, give that a light tap. Yeah, let's put 1/2 of the rope seal in here. I'm gonna kind of put it in evenly. Okay, I've worked the rope seal as best I can into the groove. Now I'm going to temporarily affix the top half to the bottom half. There's machine screws that come in from the top and hold everything together. Okay, it came down pretty nicely, but I can tell I pinched a bit of rope seal on this side. So what I'm going to do is lift it back out, try to punch it and seat that rope seal as best I can so that this carrier is flush to the block surface. Yeah, okay, so you see that's not a very positive connection. So I'm gonna remove some excess here and try to tuck that rope seal down in the groove. All right, just cleaned up that access. The seal is still running a little proud, which is nice. It'll still create a seal. Okay, I'm happy with the way this carrier is seated now. So the next step is to install the rear main bearing cap. Just seated on the dowels here. All right, I had to put that main bearing cap in to use this sizing tool. What it'll do is it'll spread the rope seal to the correct dimension and align it with the bore of the main caps. Okay, it's been a bit of work. I've got it all the way in there. It rotates. And I want to just get it so that this sizing tool runs pretty free in here. I'm going to take it out and spray some graphite in there. And it'll be sized. This is a graphite right here. So with everything apart here, we can see the result of the sizing tool. It's correctly sized it for the crankshaft, and it will swell a little bit when it gets oil on it, so it'll get a nice positive seal there. And we can see the graphite line here. We went well past that angle there, so I know it made it right up to the sealing size. Next up, we're going to do some simple bottom end engine assembly. It's pretty typical to what we find with almost any other gasoline engine. So we've got the main caps here to put on that have been resized. Main cap bolts, we'll lube those up, torque them to spec. But one thing I really got to do right now is make sure that our thrust washers are correct. So we see the original worn thrust washers here, and we'll have to find a combination of these 4th thou oversized and standard ones to get the correct thrust. That's the crankshaft moving backwards and forwards. Got new bearings here, measured those against an original. They're all within spec. And lastly, we have the crankshaft here. It's been completely cleaned from the inside out. These sludge plugs have been taken out, and it's been dipped. And I think there's been a slight polish on the journals here. So yeah, we're ready to go. Let's get this thing in. Okay, I got the center main bearing cap here with the standard thrust washers. Just gonna nestle it all together in there, put it on the right way around. Okay, gonna check the thrust by moving the crankshaft fore and aft. So get it all the way one way here. Looking like about 32 thou on the dial indicator. Moving it the other way. It's looking like 28 there. So that's 4 thou. That's well within the range. I think we're looking for anywhere between 4 to 6 thou. Perfect. We can move on. Everything all tightened down, torqued up. Let's see if it still turns. Oh yes, look at that. It's a thing of beauty. I want to complete the crankshaft install, so I have to put the seal in that we already sized, the seal retainer here. Now it has to go in the right way. See, it's cut out here, and that cutout is so that this oil slinger, this scroll and oil slinger, can throw it up into this cutout down this hole and this return pipe down to the sump. If I put it on the wrong way, guess what? It all goes down onto the road. So yeah, let's get this installed. Assembly lube here. And a little bit of silicone here. Now the carrier assembly. Put it in there. And yeah. Crankshaft is in. Now we can move on to pistons and rods. Now these rods have had the absolute deluxe treatment. They've been balanced, so they all weigh the same by taking off a little bit of material here. They've been resized, so a little bit of material taken off the mating surface and sized for the bearings. We've got new ARP rod bolts and nuts. And also the pin bushings, they've been resized and replaced. So yeah, these things have been completely rebuilt. Great way to rebuild these engines. We have the new HEPA lights to go in. You've seen me do this lots before. I'm gonna put the rings in, I'm gonna stagger them, I'm gonna put in the new pin, and yeah, let's put these in the block. So one last thing I want to do before I put my piston assemblies in is just clean the bore with some brake cleaner. And the brake cleaner's nasty stuff, so I got my nitrile gloves on. And yeah, just do one last final wipe down. Make sure there's nothing in that bore. Look, it's coming out clean, isn't that great? Okay, setting up a piston. First thing I want to do is make sure I have lots of assembly lube down in that rib spin area so the connecting rod has a lot of free movement. This will help line up the big end journal and the crankshaft when it comes to putting the cap on. The rings have to be staggered, the gaps, so I put the compression rings at 180 and just make sure that my oil scraper rings aren't in the same line. Also the circlips, checking the gap of the circlips, they have to be the same. If the circlips aren't seated right, we're gonna make an awful mess of this engine. So yeah, next thing I wanna do, now that I know that all my piston rings are staggered, is I'm gonna use this compression tool and we're gonna tighten down. There we go. And I want to put the bearing on here. Now I'm going to use some assembly lube. I kind of use it as glue. Otherwise, when I tap down on the top of this piston, this one bearing has a chance to drop out. So assembly lube kind of works as glue. It's really helpful stuff. So there we go. Now we're ready to put this on the motor. Okay, in goes piston number 1. You can see the lettering there on the connecting rod big end. I like to put this stamping on the exhaust side, just a force of habit. And I also don't put anything in the cylinder bores. Don't want to put oil down there. I think it helps the rings bed a little better. There we go, it's in. Look at that, all the pistons are in. Got them all torqued down. And I have to make sure they all had free play still. They still move back and forth a little bit. Don't want everything all locked up. So next up is setting up the distributor drive shaft and the gear on the top of it here. That gets pretty close to the main cap. Have a look at that. So we have to set this up. I'm going to slide on another gear onto the nose of the crankshaft to set it up properly so the distributor rotor is pointed in the right direction. You can see it here on the bench, so I'm going to slide this on next. It goes on with a distance piece. This is the seal surface for the front seal. Got a new distance piece, and there's an O-ring inside. Helps seals the oil. I'm going to put on the old sprocket. I'll show you what that looks like. It actually has some text from Reynolds inside it. And the crank nut, of course, with the dogs to drive it with for a hand crank, feature of only the very early engines. Okay, I turn the engine over. Now I can show everybody what I'm up to. I'm going to drive this gear home onto the nose of the crankshaft. And while I'm doing that, I need to respect this distributor drive. I need to make sure that this is pointed at piston number 1. We're at top dead center right now. So I want to drive it so when a gear goes and engages, it'll end up right like that. That's the idea. I'll show you what it looks like in the manual. So I think if I put it straight up and down, that tends to put it in the right spot. So there we are. We can see it's pointed at number 1. The engine's at top dead center. That's right where we want to be. So here we are, flipped around again. You can see the completed distributor drive assembly. Now, some sharp-eyed Jaguar enthusiasts will notice this very particular and unusual main cap up at the front, and that's because this curve runs a really different kind of oil pump that's mounted on the side. Later ones were mounted on the top. I'll show you what it looks like here. This one was reconditioned by Stuart at Coventry Auto Components. I filled it up with assembly lube, so we're going to get pressure, prime the pressure before we start the motor. And let's install it right now. It has this extra long coupler that's unique to these early cars. And I'm gonna install it like this. And we have a dowel bolt. One of the bolts is a dowel bolt, so it accurately locates this pump onto the main cap. Okay, next up I wanna put what has to be the most important pipe connection on the whole motor, and that's the oil pump delivery pipe. It goes from this oil pump down into the block and feeds the whole oiling system. So what I'm gonna do is I made some gaskets here out of some oil resistant gasket material. I'm gonna put them in with silicone, and then I'm gonna fasten it as securely as I can down to the block, to the oil pump. Now I haven't actually tightened the oil pump down. It has a bit of movement. Then I'll tighten the oil pump to the main cap just to get as good of a connection as I can. I do not want these gaskets blowing out. So that copper supply line's in. It's a pretty nice looking piece. It's kind of an artifact of a bygone era because we don't make oil lines and engines out of copper anymore. So I kind of like that. Next up is this baffle that's actually attached to the main cap. So we're going to get this in. Last part of the equation is what Jaguar call the floating suction tube. I think what this does is it really just acts as a floating filter because this oil pump is sitting well within the oil bath. So they don't just want anything to suck up in here, especially not the sludge at the bottom or any debris. So that's why I'm going to install this. It's pretty simple. It just goes in. I got a roll pin to put through here and it'll be installed. That's it. I think I'm gonna run some lock wire just to make sure that roll pin goes nowhere. Next up, I'm gonna do the complete timing gear, the chains, the tensioner, the sprockets, the shafts. So you can see the carriers here, I walnut blasted these and then just cleaned them up with a degreaser. I think these look good, but the amateur would go for perfection. They'd sandblast these, and when you sandblast aluminum, that's what these are, it embeds the sand into the aluminum. That's what gives it that beautiful matte finish. And on engine internals, that's a big no-no because during the heat cycles, it releases the sand. So definitely don't want to sandblast any aluminum, especially engine internals. Just leave it for steel components. Even these components here, these sprockets, high-strength steel, I only used walnut blasting on these two. No sandblasting on the engine internals. Now these shafts were full of sludge and gross grease. I couldn't even see through them before, and so I cleaned them out. That's nice because it'll oil the bearing surface for the sprockets. I'm using the old spring blade tensioner. What do you think, everybody? Yeah, pretty old school, but it worked for 60 years. They'll work for another 60 years. And I am reusing the sprockets. They're in good enough condition. They lasted 60 years. They'll be good for the next 60. What I am renewing is the timing chain and the guides here. These are new German Iwis timing chains. I don't cheap out on these things. I made sure they were the right length. I always do that, but I've never found an Iwis to be a link short. And yeah, the new guides, that's a no-brainer. All right, let's put this together. All right, I know I've showed this assembly and assembling this before, but it's worth going over because they didn't change this design all the way up till 1972 with the late E-types and XJ6s. And it's a pretty ingenious design that lets the cylinder head come off without having to mess too much with the timing. So the lower timing chain feeds from the crankshaft to this intermediary sprocket, the large end. There's a smaller sprocket down here which feeds the upper timing chain. Now the lower sprocket has its own tensioner, but the upper sprocket is dictated by the user. This idler sprocket is actually on an eccentric cam. Let me see if I can show you the motion here. Here we go. So the sprocket's moving around, and what this lets the user do is release or create tension as desired, which lets the cylinder head come off, up and off, which is nice. So let's see if I can remember how this all goes together. We're going to start with the longer chain, sorry. It's going to go around the intermediary sprocket. Then I'm going to pretend like my upper sprockets are here. I'm going to borrow the idler. I'm going to stick it in here and around. I'm going to take my lower timing chain. It's a pretty compact unit. And get that started. I will get my... And then we will attempt to put this assembly together. Let's see how this goes. There it is. Yeah, look at the difference between the old and the new. The old guided wore right down to the rivets. What a hideous noise that would have made. Okay, I got this guide in. It's easy to get the bolts in before this assembly goes in. There it is. Pretty tall engine when it comes down to it. Another pretty interesting, unique detail were these original upper timing chain guides. They were a beautiful cast piece with this material bonded on, and this was changed pretty quick to these L bracket designs with these spacers. So this is what we're putting on the car, but this is what came off. And I'd love to reuse these, but it's getting too close to the rivet. All right, now before I affix this assembly to the block. Can you see that? Yeah, sort of just see it in the bottom there. I'm gonna install the spring tensioner, the timing tensioner. It'll go in like this, nestle in there. But the first thing I gotta do is install this guide on the bottom. So later cars actually have a piece of rubber here, but these really early cars with the spring tensioner, they have a guide that the spring tensioner runs on. So we'll stick that in here. And we got our bolt. Now these bolts have a slot in them from the factory to make them easier to install. It's gonna be fussy. Feel it coming now. There, it's right there. There it is. Okay, so I got this guide loosely in there. Now I'm wondering, will the spring tensioner just slide in? Let's see. I think it's gonna go. Wow, we're getting close. Looking pretty complete here. The oil pump, timing chain. I love having all the original bolts. That's the advantage of being the first person to take these things apart, is you can put all the original bolts back where they belong. Spring tensioner set up, look at that. New chain on there, all cleaned up, ready to go. So we're ready to button this thing up. On the bench here, you can see the timing cover with these big bosses for this engine mount, which is going on. Got a rebuilt early style water pump, the original hardware. Now I want to put the timing cover on with this seal. It'll go on at the same time. This is kind of a neoprene seal that replaces the rope seal that was in there originally. So yeah, let's put it together. Just gonna put some assembly lube on the chain, let it run down here and get on that guide too. Now that's good because the way this is oiled is with these three small holes here. You see them there? Those are actually sprayers. They spray a fine mist of oil in the chain as the car runs. Back at the nose of the crankshaft, I gotta put this distance piece in, but before that happens, I gotta put my oil slinger on. There we are. Now the distance piece, it does have a nice positive seal on the outside, but not on the inside. So I'm gonna run a bead of silicone all around the crank here to ensure that oil doesn't seep from the crank nut. Okay. Awesome. Ready to put the timing cover on. I got the neoprene seal in here with a lot of silicone. I want it to seal and I want it to center at the same time. Let's do it. Now I want to put some lube in here too. Gonna lube up the distance piece here for that neoprene seal. Just a little bit. Probably should have gloves on. There's another lubrication point here, right here at the intermediary sprocket. It actually runs inside the timing cover, and a hole right here. Oh man, I just siliconed myself. Right there. There we are. Okay, so part of the timing cover sandwich is this unusual and early engine mounting bracket. It's gonna go on just like that. The last part of this timing cover sandwich is the water pump. It has like 8 or 9 bolts that go around it. This one's a really early water pump that has the water passage going around this one bolt, kind of an unusual design. And this one's been fully rebuilt in England by Stuart at Coventry Auto. There it is. Okay, last part to go on is the oil pan. That's why I've been working upside down. It's a big, beautiful cast aluminum piece that has some unique details. If we look in here, it has a provision for a sender. So yeah, on the dashboard, we can tell the oil level. Put that on, hopefully that thing won't leak. I think this was made by a company called Marshall. You can see the part number here. I'm gonna put these baffles in here like this. We'll button that up and we'll put this on, and definitely put some silicone in around these seal surfaces. There's a cork seal here at the rear. It just kind of gets sandwiched in. Wow. Okay, the last job on this block before it's totally sealed up and ready for paint are the frost plugs, the freeze plugs, and these really seal up the water jacket using a friction fit. Now what I'm running into is the fact that these just do not slide in initially. I got about a 3 or 4 thou interference here, and my friend Simon Scott gave me a really good tip on how to get this correct. And what's going on here is there's a bit of corrosion here on this surface. Can't really see it, but once we get the flapper disc on here, it'll kind of reveal what's going on in the water pump. And the next I'm going to use this flapper disc just to clean up the surface here, the edge. It's kind of hard, the camera's in the way here, but I'll try my best. Now finally I'm gonna clean up just the inside there with a razor blade. Let's see what our surface looks like. So we can see now we got a really nice clean surface, but a bit of rust painting in there, and that's what was preventing me from putting the frost plug in with ease. Gonna run some brake cleaner over here. Okay, so I got that all clean. Let it dry off here a bit. Let that brake cleaner flash off. Should be wearing gloves. So next I'm gonna put some aviation sealant in here. This is pretty much required because the surface isn't perfect. My friend Simon, he likes to put this product called Hermatite, something like that. I'll see if I can put it on the screen. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start off with the soft mallet here, and just to drive it home without warping it. Okay, there we go. Let me see, maybe I can just go in a little more at the top. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm gonna drive in the middle here to really push it out and seal the water jacket. I don't hit my phone here. I don't hit the camera here. Pretty close. We're done. Okay, I got that pan all the way tightened down. There's a lot of bolts on here, probably more than's needed. These are the original ones that I had black oxided, so they look pretty authentic and correct. I also fit the crankshaft damper, harmonic balancer, whatever you want to call it. This is a new one that was balanced with all the rotating parts of the engine. And of course we have that big crank nut on here with the bosses in black oxide as well. I have to put that sender in still. So that's one thing I will do. And at the back, you can see that piece of cork I had to sandwich in between the crank housing here and the pan. And yeah, so what I'm gonna do next is just mask off the front timing cover, the pan, and paint a beautiful coat of black paint on the block. Fast forward a few days and I got a nice coat of black polyurethane paint on the block. Put some epoxy primer down beforehand. Nice professional refinish. And it's sitting in front of a really nice original 62 XK Roadster. Pretty nice to see old original cars showing their original fits and finishes. Have a look at that. Anyhow, I want to finish this block, the lower part of the block, and I got two things I got to install. One is the oil filter housing and oil filter, and one is the oil sender, believe it or not. Let's get a close-up of this flange and we'll install the oil sender. So here's the fuel sender itself. I took it apart and I resealed it because these are notorious for leaking. I'll show you what it looks like. You can see we have a float here that actuates the electrical connection inside. I'll show you what that looks like. And I've just put a layer of silicone in and around this hardware here and all around the top cover, which has been black oxided. And yeah, let's put this in. Okay, oil sender's installed. We can send a prayer to the Jaguar gods for no leaks on this thing, and hope it sends properly as well. Now my next task is the oil filter housing. Look here on the bench, we can see what makes up the whole assembly, and there's a lot to this because oil filters back in the day were quite simple but very robust elements. I mean, look at the felt in there. I got one of these new old stock. I lost the original box, but really happy to have it. This is actually a reusable oil filter. In the manual it says to clean it out between intervals with just fuel or petrol. Pretty amazing stuff. So there's a lot that goes on with this sandwich. We'll put it together and put it on the block. See this main through bolt. See the upper pieces we'll need and the lower pieces. The O-ring that seals it. And the gasket and hardware that go to the block. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, I guess I'll talk about the top of the housing here. It definitely wasn't made by Jaguar. It was made by specialists called Teklemit, and that's why these things are painted an unusual color. This is a metallic bronze. Maybe it was hammer tone. I don't know. I didn't have a lot of paint on there to compare it to, but I just love this hue. And yeah, let's get to assembly. So the first thing I've already done here is I've put the felt on the upper part of the assembly. Then we get this huge, I'll call it a filter washer. It goes up in here. And it's all held together with an O-ring. There it is. So now I have to deal with the lower assembly, the main housing here, and it has some threads down there, and I have to crush a piece of felt in there. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to glue the piece of felt to this washer. So I have some 5-minute epoxy here. I'm going to dab it on here. Okay, we can put the lower assembly together. It's kind of a fussy job. I might not be able to get it on camera really well, but I'll show you what's going on. Got a spring going down in there, the washer with the felt on it. And then I got to get this big cupped washer. And it actually goes down on the thread with this really cool looking clip. So I'm going to do that right now. Sorry I can't do this on camera. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. There it is. So you can see the lower assembly there. That clip just helps hold it in place while the whole thing's going together. And the last thing I got to do is put in this oil filter element. Yeah, this is pretty neat. It's kind of like building an oil filter from scratch rather than just throwing away the metal canister. So there's a big O-ring that I have to put on that will mate the two pieces of the housing together. Get that in there. Make sure that's seated nicely. Put my big new old stock felt. Okay, now this should engage with the threads. There it is. Amazing. Let's put it on the engine. Well, flipped it over, and I think I'm done with the bottom end. I just love this oil filter housing gleaming back at me. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. And overall, I'm really happy with the way this bottom end of this engine came together. Just all the details, you know, getting all the hardware black oxided and getting the water pump rebuilt and got this double banjo fitting on here. Just everything about it, just all the small details and how clean it came out and how well it went together. I'm really happy. So the next step, we're gonna get the cylinder head going. That was the main hiccup. It required a lot of work and a lot of specialist labor. And it's sitting all over there on the bench, so let's go have a look. Christmas has come early, folks. Woo. Wow. Look at this. Look at the finish on this cylinder head. Pretty amazing stuff. It's going to take the MLS gasket really nicely now. So there was a lot of work done to this head by Mid-Island Machine here close to us, and they had to persevere and do a lot of difficult repair. One of them were these water passages. You see the slight different tone of aluminum right there? That's because they had to weld and build up these passages and then regrind them to a factory shape. And yeah, it looks really nice. Good job, guys. They also did the full cylinder head machining. So we got new valves here, new hardened valve seats that have been multi-angle cut instead of the single grind we see from the factory. New bronze alloy guides in there. This thing is looking truly spectacular. Yeah, I can't wait to put this thing on top of the engine. Now you can see the part number here, C2242. This is a very unusual and unique part number. And we'll flip the cylinder head over and I'll show you some of the details. So here we are on the top side of the cylinder head. We can see the engine number there, W4520-8. And this is a very early head, as I was saying earlier, produced by William Mills. It has these Siamese beds for the spark plugs. And it's also studless up front. So there's no studs here that hold the cam cover up front like on the later XKs and E-types. And what this does is it makes it really hard to seal this surface here. They always leaked, and so people put machine screws. They started drilling holes in here. That's what actually these are, to try to tighten this end down. So I have my work cut out for me because this cylinder head was, a lot of work's been done to it because when we revealed it last year, it had a pretty severe warp. And if we look closely, we can see these spot weld marks all the way along. And that's where Mid-Island had this thing clamped down and we're heating it up and taking some of that warp out of the cylinder head. Now, some of that warp is still in the head, so I'm gonna be fighting that, trying to get this cam cover to lay flat on here. And it does have a little bit of wiggle. So what I'm gonna need to do is put in all of the studs and nuts and tighten it down and see what my gaps look like and get this thing sitting as true as I can onto the cylinder head before I assemble it. I also have to worry about the refinish, so I'm going to be sanding a lot of these finishes and making them look as nice as I can. And I have to thank Jay at Jetstream. He filled the holes in these cam covers and also just dressed up these beds for the copper washers and the acorn nuts. So yeah, thanks Jay. These look great. Let's get into it. So I got the 8 studs here on one side of the cylinder head. Here's what they look like here. They're kind of a stepped stud, one for the cam cap and one for the cam cover itself. Now when I put these in, I gotta make sure they go down to the right depth. I'm looking for no more than 2 inches off the deck here. And you can see 1.95. So that's pretty good all the way across. Another thing I'm looking for is to make sure they're not warped. These things are really vulnerable when they're sticking up here. And when the cylinder head's getting worked on, it tends to bend all the corner studs. And that's the case with these 4, they're bent. And so I gotta find replacements or figure out a way to straighten them. Because these studless cam covers, I don't know, the interference is very small. And so it's almost impossible to put them on and off if those things are bent. So let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, look at that, right on. So that's great, really happy with that. So next what I want to do is just clamp it down and see if we can overcome this slight warp. That'll be really interesting. Let's do it. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing leveled down on top of the cylinder head. So I'm gonna tighten first in the middle. As you do with anything, aluminum onto a straight surface, start in the middle and work out, just like the cylinder head. Okay, so I think still in the camera we can see that there's a big gap right here. oil would come gushing out of there if that was just left like that. So I'm hoping that when I crank down on these furthest two nuts, we can close that gap. Let's see what happens. Yeah, look at that. Okay, so I think we're gonna be good. You see that way that just came down like that? That's gonna be enough of a squeeze for the gasket. So we're golden on this side. I think it's gonna work. Just gonna make sure the back is gonna do the same. But yeah, wow, isn't it remarkable just how flexible these aluminum cam covers are? That's amazing. Got the other side on here, the other cam cover, and not surprisingly, it sat down nicely as well, which is great. You can see we're gonna get a nice seal here in the front. So that's bloody brilliant. I just love this look with these smooth cam covers and the Siamese beds on the spark plugs here. It's indicative of a really early car, so it's really nice to retain these features. So next, I'm really gonna work on the cosmetics of this whole thing. I'm gonna start sanding, and there are some blemishes here that I'm not gonna be able to completely get rid of. See if we can pull a focus here, especially over here. Just some corrosion and pits, but I'm gonna try my best. I'm gonna start probably pretty aggressive on this, maybe something like an 80 grit, especially right in this area. Work my way up to 1,000 grit, then polish it all. I'll acid clean the V, and then we can start assembling it. So yeah, a lot of cosmetic work. I'm gonna start sanding for the next few hours, then we'll get back to you guys and show you what it looks like. Time for some cylinder head assembly. As you saw, I finished polishing the front here. I like to do that before assembly. Now I've cleaned it out, and you saw me blow it out too. That's just to get rid of any debris that might be hiding in the cavities here. There's quite a lot of little cavities in this cylinder head, and I just don't want any metal shards entering and being inside the cylinder head, that's for sure. So I got everything here to put the valve springs in. I got my Moss kit for the valve shims. We'll be getting into that. I got the new springs here, got new valves. They're numbered. They were specially put in by the machine shop, so we'll make sure those go back in the correct order. Got my assembly lube, you better believe it, and new Tappets cam followers. Let's see how this goes together. All right, got those valves in. We see the stems poking out through here, and this is the collar that retains the spring. So my next step is these valve shims. These are an integral part of the assembly process to get the right shims, the right gaps for a quiet running engine. So there are a range of shims that Jaguar had available. We can look at the page from the parts manual here. Jaguar called them valve adjusting pads. Part C2243A through Z, giving a range of 85 thou to 110 thou. And if the cylinder head hasn't been modified, you usually can get the correct gaps using those adjusting shims. Now I have a kit here I'm gonna rely on. I like to use new shims, and this Moss Motors kit is a great way to go. It's part number 21-1272 on the Moss Motors website, and look at that. The full range of adjustable shims for an XK engine. I think this is a pretty essential part of the process. Now, what's nice about this kit is it goes outside the range. In fact, this goes from 85 thou to 124 thou. And you might be asking, well, why would you need shims outside the range? And that's because when machinists put new hardened valve seats in these cylinder heads, they tend to err on the side of caution and not cut them all the way deep enough to get to that range, essentially giving a valve shim past 110 thou. So when new seats are put in, it's totally acceptable to use oversized valve shims. And if we look here at the shop manual, valve seat inserts, there's a measurement of 320 thou, and that's the measurement from when the valve's sitting in here from the end, from this stem to the camshaft when it's installed to the back of the lobe. The difficulty is it's really, really hard to take that measurement. It's really hard to measure 320 thou, go back and forth and cut the valve seat just to that range. So that's where I like this Moss Motors kit. It gets us up to 124 thousandths on the adjustable shims. And if you go on the Moss Motors website, I think they offer shims up to 150 thou, which is really convenient and a nice way to go. Okay, I run into a small issue with these tappets, putting the tappets on top of the shim here. I just love how this has the part number on it. So this is a brand new unaltered shim, and it goes in, but it goes in really tight and it's not free to spin. See that? And I need that to be free spinning. I can't have it tight like that. So the solution for this is to modify the tappet itself. And so I actually put a dab of paint in the bottom of one, and I spent a lot of time getting 800 grit and taking a small amount of material off this tappet so that when it goes in, we can spin it. Okay, I got the camshaft in, torqued this cam cap down to 10 foot-pounds, 10 foot-pounds on each of these nuts. Now what I'm going to do is rotate the camshaft around so the back side of the lobe is on the tappet, which will put a gap in between the tappet and the lobe. It's your valve gap. Now I think I pre-measured this, so I know it's about 18 thou. So 18 thou, yeah, it just goes in there. And then I got a 19 thou feeler gauge here. It's nice to have these bent ones. They go in there and it doesn't go under, right? So what I do is I have a piece of tape actually here up on the cylinder head, and I'll write 18 thou. Now, since my baseline shim was 90 thousandths, I can kind of compute which shim I need to put in there to get the correct 6 thou gap for the exhaust. And I'll do that with all of these, and then put in the correct shims, and we'll have all the valve gaps set for this cylinder head. It's a bit of a process, but it's worth doing right. Look at that, I have success. I had pretty good gaps all the way around using my baseline 90 shim. And with a simple math now, I can get the correct 4 thou intake gap. So for instance, there's 19 thou here, which is 15 thou too large, has a 90 thou shim, so I'll bump it up to 105. So I'll do that with all the shims, and I think this cylinder head's gonna be pretty much done after that. So now I'm ready. I think I got all my ducks in a row so we can put the cylinder head on the block. What's new here, well, I got the studs in place. You can see all the new studs and the dowel stud that's machined to correctly locate the cylinder head on the block. Now this is a pretty special cylinder head gasket. It's a multi-layer steel gasket. You can see it's 3 layers there. This is a modern alternative to what's available. You can see the new Hepalite pistons here as well. 8.0 compression, we're not changing that on this engine. Now the cylinder head here, it's been a lot of work, but it's set up correctly. And one tip I'll give everybody is that there's some studs that pass through here. I just put a dab of silicone in behind them and the one down in the corner, maybe preventing a potential oil leak. And I did run into a few teething issues here. One was with the cam bearings. I'll show you what these bad bearings look like. Do not buy these because these bearings held the cam caps proud and it wouldn't let them seat, and I couldn't do anything correctly. So I had to get better cam bearings. That was one issue I found. The second one was oversized shims. I needed a couple oversized shims because my seats weren't ground down quite to factory spec. And also this dowel bolt itself here, dowel stud, sorry. It was about 10 thou too big. It would not let the cylinder head slide over it. So you had to overcome a few issues, but I think we're ready to go. Let's put the cylinder head on the block. We are getting close. Got the cylinder head on there, torqued down, and the cam covers on. And I'm really happy with the way this thing's coming together. This studless cam cover look. It's kind of exotic, feature of only the early cars. And it's looking great here right now, isn't it? So I wanted to keep this cylinder head pretty authentic. So I went the extra step and I replated all the original hardware that came off of it. One of them being these big domed acorn nuts. I'm happy I went the extra step with these because when compared to the later ones or the reproduction ones, these are actually slightly shorter. And I think they were lengthened to accommodate studs protruding too far. And so it's nice to keep that early look. Same thing with the small acorn nuts and the cam covers. I'll show you. The later ones are slightly different. They're a little taller. And I think that's what really makes this engine such a spectacular build, is we're retaining all the original hardware. Even these studs, these are the original studs replated. And I just like that kind of look. You know, you got all the original black oxide hardware here as well. And that's the way I like to build things. So I want to put the studs for the intake side on here. They're quite long. I'll show you them here on the bench. These are the original ones. I had to make one 5.5 incher. So I'm going to put these on. There's a bit of a road map in the XK120 Explored book here, which is quite nice. So I'll do that. Yeah, so let's get these in there, then we can install the intake manifold. So before I put the studs in, I just want to marry these two surfaces together, the intake manifold and the cylinder head, and make sure that they're nice and even. And yeah, that's good. I don't see any play back and forth or up or down. I think this is going to mate together quite nicely. So we can put our studs in now. Intake manifold's on. Just polished the top of it there. See the part number here from William Mills, WM2724, and the Jaguar part number. And I have it almost fully secured except for the studs poking out for the carburetors. Put the water outlet on here just to help secure it for now. But I think this is as far as I'm going to take the engine. I'm going to take it off the stand now, and we'll reunite it with the transmission here. All right, here we are. Can finally put the flywheel on now that the engine's off the stand. And this is the original flywheel. Put a new ring gear on here. That was easier said than done. These things are really hard. Machinist Dave there said it was tougher than nails. So yeah, got the new ring gear on here. Just put it in with a few of the bolts. And I'm gonna see what the runout's like before I commit with the flywheel lock tab. And I actually have done it once around. It's about 5 thou, and I'm happy with that. See the setup here. See it going from about 85 thou there to about 80 thou. That's what I'm looking for. So that passes the test. Okay, I'm happy with this flywheel. Runouts minimals. So I secured the deal, torqued all these bolts down, and pulled over the lock tabs. One thing I should mention is that I put it in the way the machine shop wanted me to. They clocked all the rotating components and have to go in a certain way. It's got the clutch disc here itself. It has a gearbox side. Using the centering tool, you can put it in the pilot bushing. There we go, and that's ready to go. Now I have the pressure plate here. It is clocked because it has been balanced. You see all these cutouts in it? It's been properly balanced. This is a spring pressure plate. The old school style. We're keeping this car original. I'm just looking for my balancing mark and clock it in the right way. There it is. Right here. Actually not trying that. It's really tight. Is that? Yeah. Must be sitting on something. Why is it so tight? That. Well, there we go. It's pretty hard to believe this is the same motor and transmission unit that I took apart in the first video. It's just so clean and wonderful now. And what a transformation it's been. Yeah, fully rebuilt cosmetically and mechanically. There's only one thing left to do, and I think that's do a marriage. We're gonna reunite this engine with the chassis sitting right here. And I got the motor mounts all ready to go. So I think that's pretty cool. The first piece to go in the car is the motor and transmission. So yeah, let's put it in. How nice is it to finally see this engine reunited with the chassis? And I know what everybody's thinking. Yes, I will keep you up to date with how this car gets assembled. This is one of the first XK120 fixed heads, and we're returning it back to its factory original specification. It's gonna go opalescent bronze with a duotone tan interior and an absolutely gorgeous wooden dashboard. This is gonna be one of the most spectacular cars I've ever done, and I can't wait to share it with you all. All right, well, that does it for this episode. As always, thanks for watching, everybody. It was a long one. Thanks for holding in there. So yeah, if you have any tips, tricks, comments, or trade secrets, I'd love to hear from everybody in the comments below. And that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you later. Bye-bye.